So everyone's got 'em. Terrible records. Well, maybe terrible. And since the Dark Path YouTube channel had started a thread video on this topic, I thought I'd tackle it with some records from my own collection. But I'm also going to talk about what makes a record terrible, as well as if there's even a need to defend them. All of that coming up. So before we get to the records, I just want to talk about the concept of what makes a record terrible. I think a lot of things factor in. Your own personal tastes are probably the obvious one, but there's also the emotional investment you might have in the opinions of your peers. There's that. Also, when you came in on a band, that colors your opinions quite a bit. And also how you feel about a subgenre in general. Maybe you hate a whole subgenre, so one record from it might suck. So there's that. Basically, biases factor in, and you have to keep those in mind. You know, I have some of my own, and sometimes I need to get rid of them, to be honest. So there's that. So when I go through these albums, keep that subjectivity in mind, because in this video, this sucks doesn't really carry a lot of weight. So with that, let's get to the records. Of course, we're going to start with a Kiss record. This is music from The Elder, came out in 1981. This record followed a couple of other kind of off-kilter records for Kiss. Kiss did this sort of disco rock pop thing on Dynasty and Unmasked. This is a concept album, which is an interesting direction to go in. But the band was kind of desperate at this point. I mean, they kicked Peter Criss out, and Ace Frehley wasn't wanting to be in the band by this time, so they had to do something. This is the something they did. Obviously, the main criticism here is that this doesn't sound like their older stuff, so it's terrible. If that's a proper gauge of terrible for you, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I mean, the fact that it doesn't sound like Love Gun or Detroit Rock City, I don't know. That's not enough of a gauge for me. But if we're going to look at the music on its own, that's another thing entirely. So at this point in their career, Kiss wanted to do something rather big. They wanted to have an album that sold well, and I guess a concept album is what they thought of. They hired Bob Ezrin to produce this record. Of course, Ezrin produced Destroyer, so we had a bit of a track record with Kiss. Ezrin, in the interim, had produced Pink Floyd's The Wall, and that's a concept album, and maybe Kiss wanted their version of The Wall. Funny enough, it did not work out that way. Now, to be honest, I actually like this album quite a bit. I think I like it as more of a standalone record rather comparing it to the other Kiss records. It is an odd record. I kind of get why some people aren't gravitating towards it. It has orchestral parts. It has a weird medieval tale to it. It's basically not Kiss in a lot of ways, and I think that throws people off, of course, as I said before, but yeah, I dig it. I like it because it's weird. As many know, Ace Frehley really hates this album. Like, he didn't want to be a part of it whatsoever. In fact, he didn't even record with the band. He recorded all his guitar parts in his home studio out of state and then shipped them to Casablanca Records and said, "You put them in the album." So there's that. Also, this is Eric Carr's first Kiss album he's on, which must have been pretty interesting. Eric Carr gets the gig and he's really excited. Oh, rock and roll, awesome. And then The Elder. I kind of think about that sometimes when I hear this album. I think, oh, Eric. So yes, admittedly, not their best material. This was a bit of an experiment, but I do dig some tracks on this album. Under the Rose is probably my favorite track. I like The Oath quite a bit, like the Gallop riff. It's a little bit Maiden-ish. I also like Ace Frehley's guitar work throughout. I think that's probably the best part of this album is Frehley's guitar work, even if he didn't want to be a part of this album himself, which is interesting. So it might be easier to pretend this isn't a Kiss album if you're trying to enjoy it, but you might not like it either way. So there you go. Poor Born Again. I mean, look at the baby. Even he's upset. All kidding aside, this was an interesting time for this band. Obviously, Ozzy wasn't in the band anymore. Dio wasn't in the band anymore. They had Ian Gillan on vocals. Ian Gillan, of course, the singer for Deep Purple. My own theory about one reason why this is considered a terrible album might be the expectations of the older fans who expected the Ozzy era stuff or were disappointed that era was gone. I think 80s metal fans, teenagers of the 1980s, of which I was one, liked this album quite a bit because it was heavy. It was pretty 80s in a lot of ways. I think Iommi's guitar work improved. It got heavier. It got darker in a lot of ways. Plus, Dio was amazing in his songwriting when he was in this band, and I think the expectation to keep that level of music was there. Ian Gillan, again, was amazing on this record. I love his voice. The production is so-so, but I think the tracks hold up. Of course, I have favorites. Trashed is a great song. Zero the Hero is probably my very favorite song. Followed by Disturbing the Priest. Again, there are stellar tracks on this. It's a shame that a lot of people don't give this record a chance. Simply because Ozzy's not on it. Of course, the cover art is an issue with some people as well. People don't like the Devil Baby. I don't know why. Kind of has a low-rent charm to it, I think. Also, if we're going to talk about bad cover art, Black Sabbath has had a few records like that. I recall Never Say Die being not much of anything, and Technical Ecstasy? What the hell is that? Even Paranoid isn't a really good cover. Let's admit it right here. But those albums get a pass to some degree because Ozzy's on them. So maybe people are looking for an excuse to hate this record. So yeah, Born Again. The record that a lot of times gets criticism and negative opinions from people who, by and large, maybe didn't even listen to this record or even give it half a chance. Yeah, I'm looking at you. Hey kids, remember V? No? So yes, this is Exciter's fourth album entitled Unveiling the Wicked. There is a lineup change here that people consider really significant to what happened to this band. I mean, this followed three really amazing albums. There was definitely some scrutiny placed on this record as a result of that, some expectations. John Ricci isn't in the band anymore. He's a guitar player. He wrote a lot of these songs back then. So he's replaced by Brian McPhee. That is correct. I had to look. Brian brought something different to the band. His riffs were very different. I don't know if his riffs are as good. I think his leads are maybe better sometimes. This record is a little bit more mainstreamy. I think it's a little more slow-paced. It's not as speed like the other records. So some fans had a reaction to that, and that reaction was sometimes negative. So yeah, I think the production is subpar. I think there's less aggression on this record. Again, not much speed as we got from other records from them. So there are some criticisms there. But do I hate the record? I don't. Of course, as I alluded to before regarding this album cover, the artwork is a clear homage of sorts to V, the miniseries, which came out in 1983. It was about aliens, reptilian ones disguised as humans. A pretty dated reference. I think when this album came out, people knew it. More people these days might not know it as much or even remember it, so there's that. It's a pretty bad album cover. I think some people judge the album based on this cover quite a bit too. So, you can get past this cover? I don't know. I do remember this cover actually making an appearance in a heavy metal horror movie called Trick or Treat. Came out in 1986. If you remember the scene where Ragman's mom is going through his records, this one shows up. Pretty interesting at the time because this wasn't a commercial success at all. It wasn't one of the big bands. So it's interesting that the cover makes an appearance in a major Hollywood film. Just a little fact. As with many records on this list, you really do need to let go of some expectations of specific to genre and enjoy it for what it is. I think this album does lean a little bit hard rock a lot of times. Songs I like, though, I love Die in the Night. I love Shout It Out. I think Live Fast, Die Young is probably the best song on this album. Admittedly, it's probably one of the speedier ones, so maybe I have my own bias. Of course, this isn't my go-to Exciter album necessarily. The first three albums are definitely the Exciter core sound for me. I like those albums the best, but I still visit this one every once in a while, and I still dig it. It's decent. So right away, I'm aware of how contentious this band has gotten with many metal fans. They're not digging it, basically. That hatred is kind of on par with the reaction to bands like Nickelback. I think Ghost has become the new Nickelback in that respect. But, I kind of put knee-jerk reactions away, and actually I've given the record a chance, and I find that I like it. So there. So my reception of this album might have a little bit to do with the fact that I don't really expect every metal album to be influenced strictly by other metal albums or bands. I like that they mixed in other stuff. They have some hard rock in here. There's some psych rock. There's some 70s prog going on here. Also, there are some allusions to like Goblin, for instance. Goblin is a prog rock band from the 70s. They scored a lot of Italian horror movies. I listen to a lot of that stuff, so I don't mind it here. But again, I don't have that expectation that this needs to be a strictly metal album. And it isn't strictly metal. Even the band admits that. And I think it's fair not to like the music on this album if you're honest with why you don't like this music. I mean, if you're expecting it to be metal and it's not metal strictly, that doesn't mean it's automatically terrible. It just means it doesn't happen to fit your personal taste. And it's good to make that distinction. It's an honest distinction, to be honest. Hey, look, I said honest twice. So songs I dig on this album, From the Pinnacle to the Pit is decent, and I even like Cirrus. I think it's a great song. But maybe I'm more of the audience for this album. Maybe I like Merciful Fate mixed with Goblin, mixed with Pink Floyd, mixed with spooky stuff. Maybe that's just me. And at the risk of sounding like some pompous hipster, I really do dig the sense of humor going on in this record, because there is one, and I share that humor too. So I don't think it's bad because I'm not a serious fan of music. I mean, I am, but I can laugh too. And we're going to get to another record, by the way, that's even more the case with, so get ready for that. But yeah, you know what? Like what you like, and I'll like what I like. How's that? Jesus Christ, this cover. It's so wrong. Okay, this one's kind of funny. I mean, the title track actually has the lyric, "Stay hard, stay wet." Wow. So this one right out the gate gets a lot of flack because this is Raven's first album on a major label, and it does to some degree play by the rules of being major label music. I mean, it just does. This isn't Crash Bang Wallop. This isn't Hell Patrol. So yeah, they changed a bit. But I still think there's a lot of fun to be had on this album. Sure, the production is a little bit polished. The songs are a bit more mid-paced. The speediness and thrashiness is kind of gone. But I do dig some of these tracks. I love Hard Ride and Extract the Action. Even the bottom line is decent. In fact, it seems like the final 3 tracks on this album, they're probably the best thing on it. Now, of course, as for the next Raven album, yeah, I'm not on board with that at all. I think some of the commerciality of this album is even more the case on The Pack Is Back, for those who've heard that record. So yeah, this album kind of has one foot in that record and maybe one foot in the album before it. I dig it. I still dig it. It's not the greatest Raven album, but I don't think it's an entire loss either. Except for that cover. My God. So who's heard of Rough Cut? Show of hands. Well, a lot of people never did hear about this band, which is really interesting considering that it wasn't for lack of trying on their part. I mean, Paul Shortino, the singer for this band, you might recognize him, but not by name. He had a very bit part in This Is Spinal Tap. He was Duke Fame, which is pretty interesting. Also, Ronnie James Dio helped write some of this album, a few tracks. His wife Wendy managed Rough Cut, and in fact Rough Cut went out on tour with Dio for his Sacred Heart tour, so a lot of connections to Dio and a lot of connections to a lot of the mainstream music world. This is on Warner Brothers, by the way, but a lot of people just still didn't notice Rough Cut. Fun fact about this album, founding guitarist Amir Darak later went on to form Orgy. Yes, the late 90s industrial pop band. Quite a departure from Rough Cut, I would say. Of course, I do have some favorite tracks on here. I love the opening track, Take Her, great song. Also, Cut Your Heart Out is decent. I even like the ballad, the power ballad on here called Dreamin' Again. Some great stuff there. So yeah, Rough Cut. I basically mentioned them here not because they were despised so much, basically that they were ignored. So, you know, there you go. So it's fair to say that a lot of the Saxon albums in the 1980s are a bit of a hit or miss. This one's often considered a miss. This is Innocence Is No Excuse. This is their major label debut, came out on EMI, and maybe some of that is responsible for why this album has more commercial appeal. But you know, commercial doesn't always necessarily have to mean bad, unless you think anything that isn't metal is terrible. Of course, the record does show signs of wanting more mainstream appeal. It's in the production, it's in the songwriting, so there's that. Still, there are some solid rockers on here. I definitely dig Everybody Up. I think Give It Everything You've Got is a great album closer. It is probably the best track on here. And I do dig Broken Heroes. It's kind of a slow track, ballad-esque. It has a music video. I think they were trying to push the song a little bit. I like the song a lot. I think it's great. I do think side 2 is better than side 1 in a lot of respects. I think side 1 is definitely where you see more and hear more of the sort of mainstream attempt. So there you go. Strangely enough, this was my introduction to Saxon. I bought this album when it was brand new, in no small part to the girl, obviously. And then I went to the back catalog, found that music a lot more to my liking, and became a Saxon fan. But this was my gateway to that, which is kind of interesting. And last but not least, it's Steel Panther with Feel the Steel. This is their debut album. There are primarily two reasons why people have a problem with this record, and I think they're kind of interlinked. The first, of course, is it harkens back to the 80s pop metal thing, which more extreme metal fans are not going to dig too much by and large. But even if you do like this form of music, I think the other problem people have with it is a bit of a parody. It's making fun of that, but also tributing that. And I think there's some cognitive dissonance there. I think those kinds of fans get confused or insulted, so they make their enemies wherever they go. So that's kind of fun. It might be one of the reasons why I like this album. I kind of dig it. I have a sense of humor about the poking fun thing too. I mean, I like some pop metal, but I also understand that there's things to make fun of in that regard. So I don't have an issue with that. So getting back to the parody aspect of this album, I think it's interesting to compare it to the reaction a movie like This Is Spinal Tap got in the 1980s. A lot of metal bands at that time, hard rock and heavy metal bands, I think saw a little bit of themselves in it and didn't like that very much. What's interesting about Steel Panther is I think they blur the line a little bit more than Spinal Tap did. So that adds a little bit more confusion. Again, cognitive dissonance kicks in for fans of this music when they hear this stuff. More often than not. And yes, the lyrics are filthy and rude and juvenile. Probably another thing I like about it. And again, it pokes fun at itself. And I like that. I think that's great. I think parody's great. Even in music I like. So I'm good with it. So I definitely have some favorites on this one. The opening track, Death to All But Metal. Great track. I love Asian Hooker. Asian Hooker, by the way, has guest guitars by Scott Ian of Anthrax. There's more cognitive dissonance there for you kids. And of course, Turn Out the Lights. Great song. So yes, it's a novelty record, but it's also a retro pop metal record, a decent one at that. And I do like the intended self-contradiction of that. And yeah, I'm pretty sure it's intended. And that's my response to the Defending Terrible Albums thread started by Matt at the Dark Path channel. Speaking of whom, you should definitely check out the Dark Path. I'll put a link to that channel in the description of my video. Definitely do it. Also, I'll be putting a direct link to Matt's original thread video in the description of this video. You should check that out. Maybe you want to participate. You should think about it. Making videos is fun. And of course, let me know what you thought about these choices. Or maybe you have views on what makes a record terrible, or even if they need to be defended. Let me know all of that and anything else that makes sense in the comments below. And since I'm a YouTuber, I'm going to say it, like, subscribe, and share. 3 great ways to support the Accusation Network. This is the channel in which I do metal vinyl collecting videos once or twice a week. Definitely check out the playlists, check out the videos, and support the heck out of me. Why not? That's all for now. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.